Hello, this is the video for Ancient and Medieval History for Wednesday, March 1st, 2023. This message should be posted by 10 a.m. and you will have until 8 p.m. to have posted your comments, which should be a short paragraph, at least 3 sentences long, maybe a little longer, commenting on something substantive and interesting in this lesson. Okay. We will begin. We had just shown a series of videos and talked about the significance of gladiator games. Commodus, son of Marcus Aurelius, sketchy emperor, focused the attention of an increasingly frustrated Roman population and Roman government and Roman bureaucracy on bread and circuses. Bread and circuses are the names of the welfare programs that Roman emperors gave to the proletariat in Rome particularly, but in other places as well. Bread came to the proletariat of the city of Rome via grain ships from Egypt, which was a province personally held by each of the Roman emperors. It was their property, it was very productive, and they could afford to send free bread to the people of Rome so that the people of Rome would support the emperor. Also, even Jesus recognized that man does not live by bread alone. So what does man live by? Well, among other things, entertainment. Entertainment can capture the mind, focus it on things other than my life is meaningless, my government doesn't care about me, I want revolution. So, Commodus tries to buy his people off with bread and circuses. But after a dozen years of inconstant mediocre rule, where he enriched his cronies at the expense of the state, he was assassinated. Now, if you've watched the movie Gladiator, you have been told the story that Maximus, the former general of Marcus Aurelius, was enslaved and fought in the gladiator arena and was able to fight Commodus in the arena. Commodus actually did enter the arena on a couple of occasions. It was fixed. Commodus was an arena fighter the way Al Gore invented the internet. It's a politician's claim. Commodus was in the arena with opponents who had been weakened in some way by bleeding, by drugs, by poisoned food. There was no way the emperor would actually risk his life for an entertainment. But him being killed in the arena and Senator Gracchus, once again personified as a single senator, restoring the Republic, couldn't have been more far from the truth, unfortunately for Rome. What happened was the Praetorians who killed Commodus auctioned off the Imperium on the palace steps. Yes, they bid, or they allowed people to bid for the Imperium. And the highest bidder got it. Good job. So, Pertinax won the lottery, not the lottery, won the auction, and the Praetorian Guard made him emperor. But just as in the year of 4 emperors, the fact is the Praetorians, while they have the only military power near Rome, are much weaker than any real army group. So once again, we have the Rhine, we have Didus Julianus, who comes out of Britain and the north. We have Pescennius Niger. Let me go on. So we have Pertinax, who has been appointed by the Praetorian Guard. We have, in addition, Dido Julianus, Pescennius Niger, Clodius Albinus, and Septimus Severus. 5 pretenders. Because this time, you've got the commander of the British Army group, Clodius Albinus, along with Dito Julianus, who has the Rhine armies, Niger, who has the Danube armies, and once again, the winner of this longer and bloodier civil war is General Septimus Severus. Septimus Severus, not Snape. And Septimus Severus establishes the Severan dynasty. Now, this is a transition from the height of the Pax Romana to what will become the great crisis of the 3rd century. Severus is by blood a North African, a Carthaginian, basically. And Severus's wife is from Syrian nobility, particularly the priests, kings of the city of Amesia. So, when Severus wins the civil war, he establishes a new rule. Unlike the adopted emperors from Nerva, Trajan, Hadrian, Antoninus Pius, Lucius Verus, and Marcus Aurelius, even Commodus, Severus viewed the empire like the army, and he saw himself as the general. He commanded. The Senate, if it wanted to survive, would comply. Servile. Compliance was required by this new soldier emperor. Severus does strengthen the empire in terms of its military. He and his dynasty rule over the high point of Rome as a city, as a place. They have their names on some of the biggest construction projects. But this is Rome that's living off of the largesse, off of the efforts and work of the generations that came before. Severus and his harsh rule, it's an open dictatorship. There's no pretense towards anything like the rule of law or anything like the Senate and the aristocracy and the old forms of the Republic having any real meaning. Severus is in charge, or should I say, Severus is in charge, and the empire will obey or they will feel his wrath. Severus has 2 sons, Caracalla and Geta. Caracalla is pictured in your note packet, and he's sort of a brooding fellow, looking over his shoulder, almost like a model, handsomer than me by far. His name officially was not Caracalla, but he affected wearing the barbarian cloak in public, not a toga, a cloak, like you'd see in the Middle Ages, like you'd see the Germans wear or the Celts wear. And the name of the cloak that he wore was the Caracalla. So he became known as Cloaky, or the guy with the cloak, or Caracalla. That was his nickname. Much like Caligula, his nickname becomes the imperial name that we know him by. Now, Caracalla had a brother named Geta. And there are family portraits of happy, smiling Septimus Severus and his wife, also happy and smiling, and 2 sons in front of them, Caracalla and Geta. And they were supposed to inherit jointly. But when Septimus Severus dies, he dies actually in the north of England in the city of York, Iburcum, the Romans called it. Caracalla has Geta killed, and he has Geta excised from all the family portraits. So the portrait that we have is smiling Septimus, the smiling wife, smiling Caracalla, and a wiped out section in a swirl pattern where Geta's face was, but is no more. This is like an angry divorced person cutting up their old photographs to get the X out of the picture. So Caracalla becomes sole emperor. His name is on the greatest baths that the city of Rome will ever build. These giant baths of Caracalla are the size of New York City's Pennsylvania Railroad Station, which used to exist. Big place. And it's a place where countless numbers of Romans could come and spend the morning or spend the afternoon like a super duper croc center mixed with the Coeur d'Alene Resort, all rolled up into one giant place where you could, clean yourself off and then take a hot bath and a hotter bath and a hotter bath and then dive into the frigidarium, which is cold water. Wake up. You'd hear a lecture by a philosopher. You'd eat some food. You'd meet some friends. You'd play some games. The men had their stuff. The women had their stuff. The baths of Caracalla, the apogee of Rome's luxuries provided free by the emperor to the people of Rome, rich and poor. And all, of course, provided by the effort of thousands of slaves crawling under the floors through narrow tunnels, shoveling fuel into the fires that kept the various baths at temperature. Caracalla also creates one of the great, truly great legal emancipations of all time that isn't really real. What does he do? Well, I've told you up until now that to be a Roman citizen is a goal that people aspired to, whether they had blood from the empire's heart, whether they had any Roman or even Italian blood or not, so long as they or their family did conspicuous service loyal to Rome, they had a shot at becoming a Roman citizen. Remember, St. Paul, who formerly was Saul of Tarsus, was born a Roman citizen because of efforts that his family, a Jewish family in the city of Tarsus, made on behalf of Rome, so they became Roman citizens. And Paul had no Roman blood whatsoever. Roman citizens were exempt from certain types of physical punishment, certain types of labor in the form of taxes. They were exempted from being killed in any way other than being beheaded. They had a number of perks. To be a Roman citizen meant that you had the right, if you were in a court and you received a judgment that you thought was unjust, you could make an appeal to the emperor. And your case would be frozen in stasis, and you'd be transported to a jail around Rome, wherever the emperor was, and the emperor would take the time and go through the case, and you'd basically wait in prison until the emperor made his judgment. The emperor's judgment is final. So to be a Roman citizen is a really, really, really big deal. Caracalla decides it's a big deal that should be shared by everyone who's not a slave or a woman or a child or a foreigner. Every freeborn man of the Roman Empire in the year of our Lord 212 is made a Roman citizen by dictate of the Emperor Caracalla. On the one hand, on the surface, this seems like, woo! We are finally all Romans now. We, the red-haired, freckle-faced, green-eyed people of Gaul. We, the very dark olive-skinned people of Egypt. We from Syria, from North Africa, from Greece, from Spain, from all over the empire. We, in Britain even, are Romans now. We're all Romans now. Sounds almost too good to be true, doesn't it? Only because it is too good to be true! What Caracalla does simultaneously with making the Romans' citizenship designation a universal one for male, universal male citizenship, he changes the definition of what a Roman citizen is. Instead of having all those privileges, instead of every Roman citizen having all of those privileges, there are now going to be two tiers, two classes, two castes of Roman citizen. Honestiores, the honored, humiliores, the humble. The honored citizen, honestiores, the humble citizen, humiliores. The honestiores have all the traditional perks of being a Roman citizen. The humiliores don't. They have the name of being a Roman citizen. I'm a citizen now. But not the perks. They can still be tortured. They can still be compelled to do labor for the empire. They can still be killed in a variety of ways, like crucifixion. They can still be tortured. They can still be oppressed in dozens and dozens of ways. Oh, and they do not have the authority to appeal to the emperor if a court case goes against them. So when Caracalla makes universal Roman citizenship for every freeborn man of the empire, what's the word? Oh, yeah, it's a lie. But it makes for initially great propaganda until people understand that it really doesn't mean anything. When Caracalla dies, one of the most bizarre emperors in the entire cavalcade of Rome's emperors appears. A relative of Severus's wife, Heliogabalus, or Heliogabalus, is a 14-year-old sun priest of Amesia in Syria. The sun god dropped a meteor near this town, or in the center of where this town would be, and the sun priests unearthed it. The meteor is generally in the shape of a male body part. So at 14, this boy priest becomes emperor. And he tries, like Akhenaten with the Aten in ancient Egypt, to import his personal religion to the heart of the empire and to make his personal religion the religion of the entire empire. So he paraded into Rome on his arrival with an example of the stone in the image of a certain male body part, dressed as a transvestite, in other words, dressed as a woman, and dancing in front of the Roman crowd. He then proceeded to rule not as a Roman man or a Roman emperor, but as a sun priest. And famously, he also was a homosexual. But unlike Hadrian and the other Roman emperors who dabbled in homosexuality or bisexuality, like Trajan, he was a passive rather than an active homosexual. He played the part of the female. In any event, this is not something that sat well with Rome. Rome's people were not open and tolerant to the LGBTQ lifestyle. They were willing to put up with a certain degree of nonconformity in their emperors, because their emperors had the soldiers and they did not. The emperors controlled the Egyptian grain supply. They did not. The emperors were in charge of the government. They were not. So when Hadrian did his thing with Antinous, people didn't make a big deal about it. But this, being ruled by a boy rather than a man, was bad enough. But being ruled by a boy who consistently dressed as a woman, and it just didn't sit right. So Heliogabalus was overthrown fairly quickly. His brother, Alexander Severus, takes the throne. Now, the women of Severus's family, his wife's family, they end up being the powers behind the throne. In the case of Caracalla, his mother and aunt are very important. In the case of Heliogabalus, the real ruler of Rome is actually, I think, his mother. And in the case of Alexander Severus, mother and aunt are very much involved. But Alexander Severus is a different sort. Unlike Heliogabalus, Alexander Severus is a more humble fellow. He's less of a character. He's actually a very serious and earnest and well-intentioned young man. Alexander Severus is what's called a pantheist, or a syncretic pagan. What that means is, famously, Alexander Severus travels with an altar kit. And wherever he goes, whether it's with an army or to another city or in Rome itself, he unpacks his altar cloth, which he places on a table, preferably an altar, in his private quarters. And on that, he has Moses, statue of Moses, a statue of Jesus. He has a statue of Orpheus, who, according to the Olympian myths, goes to hell and back. He has a statue of Mani, or the founder of Manichaeism, Mithras. He has a bunch of god statues, and he prays to all of them. Alexander Severus, being a pantheist, believes that the God's names that we know and the aspects that we know are all reflections of the divine. Like if you look up at a beautiful crystal chandelier and you see how the light from that chandelier passes through the crystals and becomes different colors, both in the crystals and projected onto the walls. The divine is like that, pantheists believe. All of the gods that we know, all of the rituals that they want, all of the characteristics that they have, all of the sacrifices they demand, are all aspects of a common divinity. So Alexander very earnestly tries to get the truth he can from Judaism, from Christianity, which is very, very unusual at this time. This is well before Christianity becomes anything like accepted. He tries to get the truth of the stories of people who go to Hades and come back, like Orpheus, from the Persians, Mani, and Mithra. And all of these things are aspects of him trying to be the best ruler he possibly can be. He's a nice young man. He's the emperor of the Roman world from the late 2-teens, like 218, until 230, about a dozen years. And he does a good job. Rome is relatively peaceful. It's relatively prosperous. He's not dynamic like Septimus Severus was, but he's not as harsh as Septimus Severus was either. In certain ways, he's an echo, a distant echo, but an echo of the man Marcus Aurelius was. He's somebody, as Alexander Severus is, who tries to do his best, earnestly and sincerely, to be a good emperor, to be a good ruler, to be helpful to his country. And then war looms on the Rhine frontier. War with confederations of German tribes. And Severus decides that he's going to go north to the army camp of his commander of the Rhine, Maximinus Thraxus. Now, Maximinus Thraxus, whose picture is also in your note pack, is this giant of a man, mid-6-foot range, which in Roman times is a giant. He's got this big battleship-like jaw, this huge face, giant muscles. He was found as a wrestler by Septimus Severus when he was a young man, when Septimus Severus was commanding armies and traveling around the empire. Maximinus Thraxus was a wrestling champion, and Maximinus Thraxus thrashed people. He's from Thrace, that's why they call him Thraxus. And Septimus Severus liked him so much that he made him an army officer. And Thraxus actually rises to the rank of general by merit. He's not a complete lunkhead. He's a wrestler who's also fairly smart, but he's also incredibly brutal. This is a guy who has killed with his bare hands. If you work for him, do what he wants. He'll be okay. If you don't do what he wants, he'll be on you, maybe even physically. Maximinus Thraxus has been waiting for an opportunity to earn glory. And you don't earn glory in peacetime. You earn glory in war if you're a general. So Maximinus Thraxus is getting his army group ready to cross the Rhine and hit the enemy hard and break them like he's broken so many opponents in the wrestling ring. And he wants a Roman triumph, and he wants glory, and he wants power, and war is what he thinks will get him those things. So when the young, thin, small, earnest, well-meaning young emperor shows up in his army camp, Thraxus is wondering what he's doing there. Is he going to take all the glory? I mean, the man doesn't know a thing about war, so Thraxus assumes that he'll take credit, that he, Alexander Severus, will take credit for Maximinus's work. It could be worse. But then Alexander Severus announces, that he intends to establish a peace envoy and make peace with the Germans to prevent the bloodshed and horrors of war. At which point, Maximinus Thraxus, Your Majesty, would you be kind enough to join me in my tent? I'd like to show you something. It's important to your idea of establishing a peace envoy. And they go into the tent alone. A few minutes later, Maximinus Thraxus goes out and says, "Oh my, the emperor is dead. He just stopped breathing." And his troops immediately, "All hail Imperator Maximinus Thraxus!" All hail the emperor Maximinus Thraxus. His troops immediately proclaim him emperor. The cortege of Severus is stunned. They don't know what to do, so surrounded by an army, "All hail Emperor Maximinus Thraxus." And Thraxus accepts the imperium from his own army. What happened? Did the emperor just go in and suddenly have vapor lock and die? Probably not. Most likely he was helped to stop breathing by the giant hands of Maximinus Thraxus. So Maximinus Thraxus is now emperor, and the crisis of the 3rd century begins. And we'll talk more about that in a couple of days. So let's go back to the time of the Pax Romana and the transitional period to the crisis in terms of its characteristics. So we're back in your notes in section under Pax Romana, which is section B, and we're looking at item 3, geography. So, in terms of geography, the city of Rome remains the center of the empire. The city of Rome is the most important place in the empire. It is the capital of the empire. It is the seat of the emperor. It is the place where the grain ships go. It's the place where the taxes are drawn to. It's a place where the armies are commanded from. Rome is the center of the world, but this is different. In the Principate, Rome was the only city of the first rank. But under the peace and prosperity of the Pax Romana, other cities are growing in importance. In North Italy, the city of Milan. In the east, you have cities in Syria. You have Alexandria in Egypt, which in many ways becomes the cultural heart of the Roman world. You have some old cities in Greece that remain important. New Carthage is becoming important in Africa. Even some cities like Colonia Agrippina, which becomes Cologne. And other cities along the Rhine, and cities like Londinium and Ibericum, London and York in England. These are all growing. Are they up to Rome's status quite yet? No. But instead of being the only center of the world, Rome is much more the first among equals, the principal city of the many cities of the Roman Empire. Particularly Alexandria is important here and now. And a bunch of cities in Western Turkey, in Western Asia Minor, and Western Anatolia, cities like Nicaea, and ultimately later Byzantium. Now, the borders are stabilized in this period. When Hadrian builds his wall and his other fortifications, the Roman army uses those, as I've said, as jumping off points to move into barbarian territory. It is still a strategy of forward defense. The Roman legions are still staffed by professional soldiers. And they include Dacia and the triangle between the source of the Rhine and the Danube, and they include even some areas north of Hadrian's Wall under Antoninus Pius. A second wall is built north of Hadrian's Wall called the Antonine Wall. But ultimately, the empire's borders have stabilized. There aren't going to be any great new conquests, not really, after Trajan. There'll be a few in the east, but those are going to come later. The Romans get used to the idea that their empire is no longer growing to encompass maybe the entire world. The Romans get used to the idea of a permanent barbarian presence on their northern frontier with the Rhine and a permanent Asian empire, the Parthians, later the Persians will come back, in the east. They get used to controlling the parts of North Africa adjacent to the Mediterranean Sea and up the Nile towards the nearest cataract, and to a border between Syria and Iraq with Parthia. But you cannot help a garrison mentality from forming. A garrison mentality is the idea that you have your post, and your post is where you are. And that killer instinct, that hunter's instinct, that wolfish instinct that comes from Romulus and Remus, the sense that we are wolves among sheeple, that we are wolves among sheepish men. That hunter's eye, that, eye of the tiger, if you know the 80s, that begins to fade. As the Romans, even the soldiers, become used to peace and prosperity, they no longer necessarily have the drive to go out and take what is others and make it their own, which is necessary for an expanding empire. Now, during this time, Romanization really is working. The people of Gaul, of Spain, of Syria, of Egypt, of Greece, of Asia Minor, of North Africa, they don't fully, of Britain, think of themselves as Romans yet. But more and more, they are using Roman ideas to discern what is important in life. More and more, the West is speaking Latin. The East is speaking Greek. People are buying and selling with Roman money. People are living under Roman law. People are learning Roman literature. They are living life in thought, word, and deed more and more like Romans. And this period's Romanization, the effectiveness of it, will be tested during the crisis to see if it's real. Many new colony cities are built. Many of the older colony cities from Augustus's time are growing to become very stable. Now, militarily, as I said, forward defense, professional soldiers. Economically, the money of the Roman Empire is stable. After the great discoveries of gold and silver and gemstones in Spain during Marius's time, there really aren't any great new treasure discoveries in Roman times. You have roughly a constant money supply. You have the same gold and silver making the jewelry and the coins that are at the heart of the Roman economy, particularly the coins. So you have the same silver recycled over and over and over again from old coins melted down, made into new coins, and so forth. This is not growth, but it's not depression either. It is a stable economy. People get a sense of how things work, of how much things cost, of how hard you have to work to get certain things. And more, these temporary situations in economics, the stability of the currency, the stability of the price system, all of that stuff becomes more and more taken for granted as normal. It's not. It's a sign of peak prosperity and peak peace. When I say the civilian lifestyle is taken for granted, I mean that people just assume things have gotten good, the bad times are over, and the world is just going to get better. Does this sound familiar? Because despite the problems in the United States today, a lot of Americans and a lot of people around the world have thought that we have passed through the bad times and are looking at a bright Star Trek-like future. Maybe so. It would be nice to think that that was possible. But the Romans thought this in the Pax Romana times also. They thought peace and prosperity were normal. They thought being a civilian was normal. Being a soldier was the exception. They thought that having to fight for what you owned and for what you had and for the freedom that you had was uncommon. And just having it and having it protected by the rule of law and by the soldiers and by the government, that was real. They were so lucky that they could live a life and believe that law and order, peace and prosperity, civilian life, without having to worry about people taking your stuff or hurting you or hurting your loved ones or whatever, that was normal. That is such a sign of peace and prosperity. People took for granted that olive growers in Syria would sell their olive oil in Britain, that British tin would be sold in Egypt, that the empire-wide market that had been built was now the way things are and the way things will be. It's a sign of peak prosperity, of peace. It's a golden age. It's a silver age. It is an age of wonders and of miracles. And the Romans, of course, who lived through it, don't appreciate it because they don't personally experience the difficult times before or after. They just experience this peak. And they come to believe, these innocent people, that it's normal. No, it's a blessing to live under law and order, to live in a society that's peaceful and prosperous, to live in a country or where you are expected to be a civilian and not have to fight on the streets and not have to fight in the woods and not have to fight for your land and not have to fight for your country unless things are unusual. No, that is precious. And an earnest of all of this, an example of all of this, is the suburbs. The suburbs are created only in the most prosperous of societies. And we will come back to talking about the suburbs when we come back tomorrow. We'll go to here. What this all means is that you, who have heard now of the story of Commodus, the civil war after him, the transitional period of the Severan dynasty, the end of the Pax Romana period, of the Pax Romana's geography, economy, military, you're going to have to comment on something. It shouldn't be the same as anyone else's. It should be yours, and you should have it posted on the comments section before 8 p.m. tonight, Wednesday, the 1st of March, 2023. Thank you for your attention. Enjoy your day.